students, thank you for joining us for the Go Virtual Career Pathways Conference. I am Al Love from San Diego County Office of Ed, and I will be your room host and moderator today. We ask that you keep yourselves muted unless otherwise asked for during the presentation, but feel free to use the chat to ask questions during the session. I'd like now to introduce you to Jordan Lael from Urban Arena, and he's going to take us through a presentation, Landscape Architecture Career Exploration. There you go, Jordan, all yours.
All right, thanks a lot, Al, Brian. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to this seminar here. So, yeah, as Al mentioned, I am a landscape architect here in California. I've been doing it for close to 20 years now, actually, which is pretty crazy to say. But for any of those of you who are not familiar with landscape architecture, it's very similar to architecture, more so than landscape, but just think of people who, more settings like in the office type setting, doing a lot of design and working with other architects and engineers, working with developers, cities, many different other disciplines as well to come up with plans for the outdoor world, which is the landscape. So, you know, a lot of people hear landscape and they think of, you know, just stuff going on outside in your yard, you know, sprinklers, plants, things like that, which we do get into in designing. But our experience and what we do really professionally is quite a bit more than that. You know, we do get into private residential stuff, but so much more, you know, bigger scale projects such as multifamily, large parks, wetlands, retail shopping centers. I mean, one of the more famous landscape architecture places is the Great Park in New York City. So, you know, the scale and scope of it can go from small to very large. And so what we're seeing a lot of today in landscape architecture locally here is a lot of apartment buildings, multifamily as we call them. And a lot of what's happening is, you know, as opposed to the apartments that were being built 40, 50 years ago, now as the city gets more dense, there's a lot more competition amongst these apartments for renters and charging good rent money. And so what ends up happening is as the city gets denser, we in turn have to design a lot crazier and more innovative spaces to function for lots of people in the common areas for these apartments and parks and other areas. And so there's a lot of dollars these days being thrown into the landscape, which is great for us. It's pretty exciting, some fun designs that we'll get into later here in the presentation. Yeah, I mean, a lot of these apartment places are really competing with each other and trying to outdo each other. And so we're always being pushed to come up with new creative, fun ideas, which is fun for us, but also a challenge. So I can start moving through here and get into a little bit of my background. Now, these are the colleges I attended after high school here, some locally here in San Diego, and then finishing out my degree in Pomona. And, you know, starting off on my college career, I think I finished high school, I was only 17. I really didn't know what I wanted to do in life quite yet, and I think that's okay and probably pretty common. But, you know, bouncing around from a couple of these different schools, I think it was really important, especially for young people, to understand the community colleges that we have here, you know, locally are a fantastic resource for taking a wide variety of courses for relatively inexpensive cost. I think I really found kind of some of my passions and likings at San Diego Mesa College, which really helped me kind of dial in on a career path and move forward. Just the opportunity to take multiple classes in different subjects and really decide whether or not I like that and kind of move forward with that before finishing out my traditional, you know, 4-year degree. But yeah, I mean, I think I started out doing some engineering courses, architecture courses. I was all over the place, but I really found myself in landscape design which was great. And a lot of the courses that you can take, or that I did take, also prepared me for that degree as well, because there's a lot of overlap in the profession once you get into the professional world, just in communicating with other consultants, other architects and engineers and that thing. So having an understanding of what they do as well is really important. But yeah, I think the unfortunate part in San Diego is that for my profession, specifically landscape architecture, there is not a program in San Diego here. Mesa College did offer some courses that helped in my earlier phases of that career, but you couldn't get the traditional 4-year degree through Mesa, obviously. So I ended up going to Cal Poly Pomona, which is still relatively local, just a couple hours drive away, but landscape architecture as a degree so far to date is not offered in San Diego, although architecture and engineering are at some of the universities. So let's see, what else did I have here? Some of the important stuff too that I took at San Diego Mesa College that really helped prepare me for the future, and as well as the other colleges, are some of the Autocad classes that they offered, really learning some of the computer programs that we use day in and day out, as well as some of the other plant ID and botany type courses. And as I mentioned before, even some of the architecture courses, just really understanding design and understanding what other disciplines do that you end up working with day in and day out throughout this career. There are, of course, other things that we as a firm, when we're hiring, look for people to know and understand that aren't always taught at some of the local schools, which, hopefully they start picking up on and creating some more of these courses. But you can never learn enough of the AutoCAD program. They offer, some introductions to it in the schools, but the more anybody coming into architecture, landscape architecture, engineering, any of that, if they're able to get some of these types of programs on their own and practice them and really understand, give you the game and get a job. There's other programs too that we use quite often that we'll get into later in this presentation, such as a SketchUp for 3D modeling and some other Adobe Works programs that are used for a lot of the coloring of site plans and such, which I really don't think there's a lot of courses on in any of the universities I went to, but they are very important, used all the time, and really valuable skill set to have across the board, not just in landscape architecture. There's quite a few different professions that use these programs. Here's the next slide, which kind of leads me into my earlier days. I've actually been at this company, Urban Arena, for quite some time now. I started there even when I was still in school as an intern, and continued working there part-time as I finished up my schooling. And then as soon as I finished with schooling, transitioned into a full-time position. And, that was really helpful. There's a lot of things that can be learned at the workplace that you're not necessarily going to learn in school. And so just understanding what it is to work with the other people, what a real time frame of these projects are, the types of projects that you see coming in, the obstacles that you see day in and day out with dealing with different clients and budgets, and all these things to plan with before plans are finalized and approved. And those are some of the things that you don't really learn in school. You come up with different designs, but you never have to change them over and over again with all these outside sources, inputting the codes and the rules and client budget constraints and things like that. So that was a really good experience as well in the schooling and the early internship days working with Urban Arena. And so I'm still at Urban Arena today, happily. It's been a great journey. I've been there for quite some time now, as I mentioned, and we have a couple offices throughout California. And not only do landscape architecture, but we also have some architects and planners in-house. And we really do a wide variety of projects, from custom residential stuff in the architecture and landscape architecture, but mainly into the multifamily residential works and all the, for the high-rise apartments downtown, we're doing the rooftop decks with the swimming pools. For some of the mid-rise apartments, we're doing all their pool areas and amenity areas and all the different courtyards, as well as working on large retail shopping centers. You know, a lot of time, all the plantings and irrigation within these retail shopping centers, any plazas that they may have, or parks built into them. And we've also done some other pretty interesting projects beyond just that as well. Right now I'm working on a brewery, the outdoor patio for a brewery, which is really cool. We've done parks and some bigger site planning stuff as well. I have some example photos here a little later for you. But yeah, so that's where I'm at now. I've been working at Urban Arena from my early college days when I was an intern to the point now where I'm a senior project manager at the firm, and you know, hopefully someday in a few years take over and run the company when my bosses retire. So it's been a good journey, and I think across the board in general, one of the things, Brian, you're asking me to look into was just a typical salary range for anyone coming out of school for architecture, landscape architecture, things like this. And I think, you know, right now from what I'm seeing, it seems to be right around like $50,000 a year starting salary for people coming out of school to do this, you know, which is pretty good. And you know, that's going to vary from city to city and firm to firm, but that seems to be kind of a ballpark thing. So as I was mentioning in the previous slide with education, it is very important, you know, what we're looking for in new hires. A lot of times is to have that 4-year degree in architecture, landscape architecture, and also have a really strong foundation and knowledge of the computer programs that are used day in and day out, which I'll go into some further examples in the following slides. But that's not always the only opportunity there is. You know, we have hired other people and do have other staff working for us that has gone to more trade schools for, you know, just a few years for associate's degrees in other areas. We have a few irrigation designers that specialize in designing irrigation systems, and as well as some graphic designers that specialize just in doing 3D rendering and video modeling and things like that aren't landscape architects with their education, but they're still a vital part of our company and the final presentations and plan sets that we present. So there's a wide array of opportunities and skill sets that are kind of needed for landscape architecture. And further on that, landscape architecture, I mean, we need to know city codes, we need to know planting, we need to know irrigation, we need to know design, we need to know hand drawing, all the software, which kind of brings me into the next slide here, is some of the job responsibilities and technical skills that we need to have and use almost on a day-to-day basis. They say landscape architects are kind of generalists. We know a little bit about a lot of different things, which is great. And I think one of the reasons that I fell into this career path is I didn't necessarily want to do the same thing day in and day out at work. And so having this job was actually really great. You know, most of the time we're in the office, but we do occasionally get out to go to the job sites, review the work that's being built. Sometimes in the early stages of the projects, we're hand drawing and coloring, doing 3D modeling. Later on in projects, we're doing a lot more CAD work and coming up with construction drawings, working out budgets for clients, things like that. So there's a wide variety of job responsibilities and day-to-day activities, which keeps the work interesting and changing all the time. So that's kind of fun and one of the benefits to landscape architecture. Probably best if I start moving forward here. And so you can see this is a screenshot of Autocad, which is probably the most important program that we use at the office and primarily use every single day. This is a really powerful tool that is shared and used amongst many of the different consultants. And so what you're seeing here is a compilation of a road network and all the utilities that are underground that is put together by a civil engineer, as well as topographical lines for elevation changes. And then layered on top of that are plans from the architect, which show their building outline, the parking stalls, things like this. This is the ground level of a much taller tower. So we're just looking at the ground plane here. And then as the landscape architect, we come in and kind of fill in the blanks in between, right? So we're drawing the sidewalks, the enhanced brick paving and the vehicular entry, showing the planter pots. There's actually a small dog park here. And then all this information is drawn very accurately, precisely, you know, down to fractions of an inch if we wanted to. That can then be scaled up for plans and implemented when being built in the real world. And we take these AutoCAD backgrounds and we share among tech. The whole team ends up the exact same thing, and really good, powerful communication tool between different offices and firms and disciplines. Because a lot of times you go out to a job site and don't realize we're placing the and other things because of where you know, utilities are underground and things like that. And so that's a lot of part of this behind the scenes coordination and communication doing with other disciplines and firms. That is AutoCAD, and yeah, lots of different tools on here for the drafting of it. But really powerful tool, really important, I think, to know for anybody coming into architecture, engineering, even in interior design, landscape architecture. So many different disciplines use AutoCAD as kind of a fundamental tool. This is a screenshot of Photoshop, which is one of the Adobe Suite products that we also use quite often. Another really great tool to have once a design is in its preliminary phases and we start coming up with some different concepts and sketches that the company seems to be, or the client seems to be happy with. This is a typical example of something we put together for a presentation to the city, the community, the client. But we basically would take a AutoCAD background that's black and white and add color to it, textures, shadows, some imagery, but to really bring it to life, really make it real. Not everybody can stare at a black and white two-dimensional plan and really understand fully what's going on or grasp the concept as easily. So Photoshop, this is a great tool for coloring it, making it a little more interesting, making it look a little more realistic. And that used to be the primary tool for presenting projects in the early phases a decade ago. And it'll bring me to my next program here, which is Sketchup, which is a three-dimensional program that you can build the model in actually. And this is, I'd say, an even more powerful tool and typically much more commonly used these days for presenting projects in the earlier stages, just because once again, it really helps understand the space that's being built. This project, as an example that I have up here, is a rooftop of a parking garage that's designed right now in the San Diego area. But just understanding, you know, the heights of the planter walls and the overhead structures and everything else going on in there, there's so much more going on than just the two-dimensional plane. So having all this in 3 dimensions to really get a full understanding and a better understanding of the space is a really powerful tool, really helpful, and not only to us as designers, but also to clients, cities, communities, wherever we're presenting our ideas, for them to really understand what's going on. So I'll get into some more projects here. This was created with Photoshop. This is another preliminary site plan. And the reason I was pulling this one up is I wanted to get into some projects that are going on here in San Diego. This one was actually recently built in the UTC Mall. It's a large apartment complex. And I'll show some built photos of it in future slides. But this is a great example of early stages years ago. We came up with some drawings, some plans, some designs. These are some of the initial graphics that we presented to the client, the city, to really sell our ideas of what we envisioned the space to be. And all the cool, fun stuff that can happen out there around the swimming pool. and this kind of goes back to some of the earlier items I was talking about in the competition between the apartment complexes and the amount of money and design that's starting to really go into all these spaces that we're designing. It is just incredible. I mean, this project turned out great. There's so many different seating areas and opportunities for gaming, swimming, lounging, seating, all that stuff. So just really trying to create a space that's used for lots of different groups, large and small individuals, all these things that we're having to think about when we're designing this. So these, from that preliminary site plan that's two-dimensional and colored, we started using the SketchUp modeling to really build these in a three-dimensional thing to once again help everyone understand the real intent behind our design and what it would look like when it's built. And so what I did here is I have some 3D rendering photos from the SketchUp, but then I also put next to it some actual photos of the site once it was built, so you can kind of compare and contrast them, you know, how real these programs can make the spaces look and feel, and how close you can actually get to constructing some of this stuff in the computer model to when it's actually built. So it's pretty impressive, pretty neat stuff.
Hey, Jordan, can we jump in really quick?
Yeah.
So we have a couple of questions that were specific to the software. How long did it take you to master computer-assisted design? And maybe what specific program do you guys use?
Yeah, so right now we're just using AutoCAD 2020, I believe. You know, it changed. They come up with an update every year. And to be honest, it probably took a year or so to get really comfortable and move pretty quickly in this design. I know a lot of the courses that they offer, you know, for a semester or a quarter at the schools are a great introductory tool, but they're really not going to get you to a more advanced level. So that's why I was emphasizing, you know, some importance of actually practicing these on your own or beyond that, because they actually really do take a long time to get comfortable with. We primarily just use AutoCAD for two-dimensional stuff. There are three-dimensional versions of AutoCAD that I know architects and some engineers use. We don't. But these programs get even more complex. And, you know, you can use them for a wide variety of tools for a wide variety of disciplines. So there's a lot on here. I mean, just the screen up here showing all these icons. I've been using AutoCAD for almost 20 years. I don't even know what all these buttons do because some of them I've never used or needed to. So, you know, but yeah, I'd say it probably took a good year to really get comfortable with it, using it almost every day. So there's a lot to these programs. They're incredible tools. They can do a ton of different stuff. So, but, you know, getting the basics down, I think, 1/4 semester at schooling will really get you a good foundation, but to develop those skills a little further will probably take a little bit more time realistically.
And one other question to tied to software, is SketchUp easier to learn than AutoCAD, Solidworks, Revit, etc.?
Yeah, so I think so. I downloaded SketchUp or started using it a while ago when Google was making it a few years ago when it was still free. And it's different than AutoCAD. There's a lot of things that AutoCAD does that I wish SketchUp would do, and there's a lot of things that SketchUp does that I wish AutoCAD would do. But I do think just to learn it outright, I think it actually is easier. The only time I think SketchUp gets a little difficult is when you're going in and editing and changing a model that maybe somebody else did that they didn't build the way that you would, where AutoCAD's a little easier to work with in those regards. But yeah, I think SketchUp was a little quicker and easier to learn. And this is a really fun tool. It's great. You know, once again, this is used by interior designers, architects, landscape architects. You know, even if you're thinking about remodeling your house or a friend's house or helping them out with designs, there are online libraries that have different furniture and cars and people and things like that that you can just download and drop into your model, so you don't actually have to build all this stuff from scratch. So it's actually a pretty cool tool, pretty fun to use, you know, even on a personal recreational level. I know when we were looking at remodeling my house, I used it to show my wife, here's what I'm thinking the house would look like, and to really help her visualize it. And it was just great. It was a very helpful tool. You can even pick out paint colors and things like that. So a fun tool to have. And yeah, I think a little easier to learn. This one I don't think would take a year to master by any means, you know, much quicker to get a handle on it, you know, maybe a week or so of really immersing yourself in it. You'd really have this one down.
Perfect, thank you.
Yeah, of course. All right. So yeah, so here, once again, some shots of this project in UTC that we did, which is built and open. Now they're renting out the apartments, but really cool. It's fun to design this one. I mean, we were even getting down to the specifics of what plants would be used where. So really helping the client see. So this page, maybe not as exciting as all the 3D renderings and stuff, but very important. These are construction drawings, or as we call them in the industry, CDs. And these are the final plans. You know, these are typically 24 by 36 inch pages or 30 by 42 pages. This is primarily done in Autocad. This is what you're using Autocad for, your 2D black and white drawings. And these end up being booklets or plan sets from anywhere from, you know, 5-10 pages. Sometimes they're 100 pages, depending on how big a project is and how complex it is, that we'll put together. And these are the ones that get printed out and sent into the cities for them to review, stamp, and approve. These are the ones that get printed out and sent to the job trailer for the contractors to bid off of and build their plans, build the project from. So these are very important. Not as exciting as all the colored 3D stuff, but very important. Used all the time, used by every contractor and architect, landscape architect. There's a big plan set of these on every job site you ever go to. And it's not just the landscape architects that have these. The engineers, the architect also has big plan sets. So these are just, the landscape ends up being a chapter in a bigger novel, if you will, that's used. This one, here's this is a video, a little fly through that's created. So this also is some fun stuff that we do. We take some of these SketchUp models and drop them into other programs to create fly-throughs to really help sell bigger sites where you're not just going to see it in one scene, but you really want to fly through the whole model. I'll just let this play through briefly.
Jordan, while that's playing through, we had a question. Do you have a horticulturist on staff?
We do not. I think everybody who works with us that's gone through the landscape architecture program and knows plants fairly well. They went through plant identification classes. So we learn a lot of Latin, learning all the plant names, and especially the common ornamental plants that are used here, and a lot of the California natives. So we don't have a horticulturalist, but I think everybody that's taken landscape and got their landscape degree has a good understanding. You know, some of the requirements are soil science classes, plant identification classes. So you do have a good fundamental background knowing about plants, but not necessarily a horticultural background. That's a slightly different skill set. Some of the projects we work on sometimes are like we've done wetland restorations and things of this nature where we're designing pathways that go through the wetlands, but they will bring on, you know, different botanists and horticulturalists, arborists, things like that, to help come up with different plant palettes and work with us on those types of projects. So this is a fun apartment complex. This one's still in the design phase, but another example of crazy ideas that we're trying to come up with new, fun, unique experiences. In this apartment complex, these are more rooftop amenity areas where we're looking at using old fuselages and pieces of planes from retired airplanes to actually be a part of the project, just to kind of create a new, unique vibe and something different that people haven't seen before. Something to really help the client sell this apartment, you know, versus the apartment next door. So just one example of some fun stuff. I'm not working on this one personally. but being worked on by our firm currently.
Hey, Jordan, where do you guys come up with these ideas? Like, you know, who would come up with the idea of using a airline fuselage as a potential, you know, housing?
You know, sometimes we have brainstorm meetings where our principal will call the entire office, get us all on a call together, and everybody just spitballs out ideas. We got a new project coming in. It needs to be different. It's going to be located here. This is kind of what it's going to be. What do you guys think we should do for it? And so quite often we have meetings like that where everybody comes together and just starts throwing out crazy ideas. Our principal has a motto that is no idea is a bad idea, because even if it's not used, you know, a lot of it lead to another, inspires with another idea or concept. So yeah, a lot of times coming up with theme or something like that isn't necessarily from the client or something that the client wants. It's just us coming up with fun, unique, creative things to try to have something new and unique. And sometimes it sticks, sometimes it doesn't. And sometimes we presented something like that to a client and they'd be like, you want me to do what? Get pieces of airplanes? I don't think so. It's going to be too expensive. But sometimes they're like, hey, that's great. That's an awesome idea. Let's do it. So sometimes it works. A lot of times what will happen is we'll come up with crazy ideas and concepts, and what ends up being built and the final product is something that's a little more refined and realistic. But it was that big picture, that bold idea that kind of got us a starting point, you know, before it whittled down into something that was actually implemented.
So Jordan, how long exactly would you be working on, let's say, this project you're showing us right now?
Yeah, great. So this project, this is the one in UTC I was sharing some pictures and plans with earlier. We got this project in 2015, and I believe it opened in 2019.
Wow.
So, and before we got the project, there was already an architect working on it with the developer, coming up with some, you know, initial entitlement type drawings, trying to figure out how many units and other things like that. So typically, I've asked developers the same question too, but from the time a developer would acquire a piece of land, have it designed, entitled, built, and they move on to the next one, is typically you know, about a 4 to 5 year timeline, which is something I think that a lot of people don't realize, is how much time and effort and work goes into something like this. It's years of meetings, plans, designs, collaboration between other consultants, you know, changing your design because of you know, code reasons or budget reasons, and trying to keep the initial design intent, you know, fighting tooth and nail sometimes to keep your design the way you want it. And so, yeah, so the picture in the upper left here, these are all from that UTC residential tower in the UTC mall. But the picture on the upper left is one during construction before they poured the water in the pool. And we had designed these large palm trees to sit around the edge of the swimming pool to really give you that resort feel. And they had to bring these in with the large tower crane, because I believe each tree weighed something like 20,000 pounds. So they had to bring these in while they still had the large tower crane, and they couldn't lift them up with a forklift up onto the roof deck. But this entire area is built up 3 stories above a parking garage. So there's the parking, you know, right beneath the pool, and a lot of that is to why we don't have a 10-foot deep pool. You know, it's only 5 feet. But yeah, that's also, you know, a fun part of the job in landscape architecture. You've been working on this design for years, and once it starts getting built and they start getting beyond just the concrete and the rebar, and they actually start forming up some of the landscape stuff that you designed, that's really fun to get out to the job site, see how it's being built. There's a huge understanding of construction that needs to happen for landscape architects too, and engineering and things like that. You know, we work with all these other trades so closely. So just, you know, this just kind of gives a good example of some of the stuff that a landscape architect does. We designed the shape and size of this pool. We picked out the planting that goes around it. You know, we designed this overhead structure, from the paint colors to the size of it to the TVs that go on it. you know, and other things too. Like over here, we designed the artificial turf and the interlocking pavers. So there's a lot that goes into landscape architecture beyond just planting and irrigation. You know, there's a lot of construction items as well, which I think some of those previous AutoCAD drawings show. You know, we really get into the construction details and the intricacies of all the reinforcement and concrete block and waterproofing, all sorts of stuff that you don't see on the finished product, but that we have to have an understanding of on how these things are going to be built and how they're going to work. But yeah, so this is one of the most recent projects that's local here, is why I'm showing it. But you know, we have projects going on across the state, but this was a really good one to work on.
That goes along with one of the questions I have in here as well was, and this just kind of stimulated some thought. Do you travel a lot? And if so, like obviously you're traveling for those projects, but do you travel just to go see and kind of look at what other people are doing?
Yeah, so before 2020 happened, yeah, I was actually traveling quite a bit, taking flights around the state to visit other job sites. You know, being licensed in the state of California, we have projects all over California. So I was quite often flying up to Northern California and Sacramento for different job sites, and just even for meetings, things like that. But yeah, there's a fair amount of travel involved with the technology that there is today with Google Earth and other things you can do on the internet. You can actually get a pretty good understanding of what the job site is before work starts, to really understand the surrounding environment, just online. But always going out to the site and seeing and feeling, you know, from the sun shade angles to the winds to, you know, what the views are, and how you want to orient different amenity areas within your design so that they capture those and are the most comfortable for people using them, I think is important. So we always try to get out to the job sites. And then during construction, it's always very important to go out there every so often, check in with the people building it, making sure they're following the plan, or if they have any questions. Things always come up during construction, you know, and just obviously so they also have a relationship with you. So, you know, the contractors in the field, you know, feel comfortable reaching out and calling, saying hi, things like that. But yeah, so we do travel a lot. It's been a little less now, you know, with the COVID pandemic happening, but you know, hopefully that's over soon and we can get back out to these job sites a lot more frequently. But we still do, you know, and the benefiting thing about landscape architecture is much of this is outdoors, so we can go walk around relatively safely even during this time. These big wide open spaces that are outside. So I have one more slide here that has a few more example projects and just some of the different stuff we do in scale and scope. But you know, we get into park design, playgrounds, working with the playground manufacturers. The image here on the bottom right is a pop jet fountain, which, believe it or not, even though this looks simple, I believe over $1 million was sunk in just to this fountain alone, and all the equipment and plumbing and filters and reservoirs for water that are happening behind the scenes in this. You know, a lot of money goes into these. So this is the image on the bottom right here is a large plaza up in Northern California that I believe is some of the office buildings got rented out by LinkedIn, so it's LinkedIn's new headquarters. So we're designing some really cool stuff. You know, it's not always parks and shopping centers, but, you know, also these office complexes. And then just to give an idea of some of the scope of it going, you know, anywhere from private residential to the bigger scale. The image on the upper left is a project we're working on up in Sacramento that started off with site planning. You know, this is some old farmland being slowly developed, but this is a huge project. I believe it's 2 square miles, and it's retail shopping centers. There's going to be a few thousand single family homes built here that aren't here yet. But in preparation for that, you can see some of these wetlands that were set aside, and this entire community is going to be developed so that all the drainage during storm events and things like that go into these wetlands first for like a filtration of the water and water quality, as well as creating habitat for migrating birds and other things like that. and so that would be one where we get involved with arborists and botanists, horticulturalists that help with some of the planting palettes of coming up with some of the unique plant material that they would want us to use in these microenvironments. So, but that was a fun project to work on as well. And it's still going on, you know, as future phases get built. This is one of those ones that instead of a 5-year timeline, this might be a 20-year timeline from when the developer first purchased the land to where they fully build it out and sell it off. So some of these things do take quite some time, you know, built out in phases, but nonetheless, fun to work on. And as mentioned, you know, quite a variety of different projects going on that landscape architects get involved with. So, I believe that's in a nutshell of most of what I had to talk about today, but I'd love to open it up to questions or comments that anyone had.
Yep, we definitely got a few.
Yeah.
Wondering, how long does it take to finish an AutoCAD mock-up from start to finish?
That really depends on the size of the site you're designing. So, you know, from working on it for so long, I've gotten pretty quick and efficient. But, you know, it could take, if you're designing, say, a private residence, maybe half of a day or 2 hours, 4 hours, something like that. If you're getting into designing a larger site, you know, a retail shopping center, a big park, you know, sometimes it takes days, weeks. And a lot of times you're coming up with more than one concept or design for this to present to the client, coming up with multiple designs. So yeah, some of that stuff can take some time.
Okay. Do you work with other firms? And this is kind of a two-part question.
Yeah, so we work on every project. There's always another architect that we're working with, engineers, electrical engineers, mechanical engineers, structural engineers. Not very often do we work with other landscape architects, but we have. It's not extremely uncommon. It does happen. A lot of times developers will have multiple phases in their projects going on, and sometimes they hire multiple landscape architects, multiple architects to do different areas. So, you know, we do sometimes work symbiotically with other landscape firms. And once again, that goes back to the versatility of AutoCAD, and the importance of that is, you know, so often everyone's working with the same software. They can just interchange backgrounds, work together. And because it's all drawn to scale in the model with real world coordinates and things like that, you know, everybody knows very definitively where their limit of work is, where they're designing up to, where they need to tie in with other disciplines. So yes, so not all the time, but occasionally, yes, we do work with other landscape architects to answer that question.
So the second part of that, you don't have to, because this is being recorded, you don't have to name the name of the company, but
Yeah.
you know, who is really your biggest competition in the industry, and how many companies out there do you have to consider?
Yeah, so I don't really know if there's one firm that's really our biggest competition out there. There are probably about 10 other landscape architecture firms in San Diego, and then, you know, more as you get into Orange County and Los Angeles and things like that. And you do often see, it is still kind of a small community. There's the American Society of Landscape Architects is kind of a society where all of us can be members, and we go to different events and things like that. So you do start mingling with other firms and people, and start to know a lot of them. A lot of them are people that we went to school with in the past. You know, there's only so many colleges that are offering this degree. So you do start knowing a lot of other people and a lot of other firms. But a lot of firms seem to have different niches that they fall into. You know, some really specialize in single family residential. Some really specialize in work for the city, which we don't do a lot of, doing different city parks or public schools or things of that nature. And so, you know, you're not always competing with all of them. But yeah, I mean, there are other firms that do a lot of the similar stuff that we do, and developers probably know a lot of us, and you know, probably ask all of us to give bids. And sometimes it does come come down to a little competition like that, and who's got the better price, has a better relationship with the developer that they're comfortable with working with. And so that comes in. There's quite a few jobs that we put bids on that don't always land with us, but that's okay.
So we got quite a few questions and only about 4 minutes left. So I did want to put up our certification screen here so that students can prove they did attend. But one question, how do you evaluate the contractors that you work with?
The contracts?
Contractors.
Oh, so a lot of times those are hired by the developer themselves. So they'll get different bids once they have the plans finalized by us and approved through the city. So the contractor will, different contractors will submit bids to the developer. They'll pick one based on that. And how we evaluate their work is it's typically through site visits. We'll go out there and we'll inspect the irrigation system. We'll go out there and inspect the plant material, look at the design, look at our plans, make sure that everything's built the way that we want it. And, very often when you go to like a retail shopping center planning, 100,000 plants, there's going to be a few that die. So you have to make note of those, come up with a punch list basically, and then send that off to the contractor. And they have a maintenance period built into their contract where they have some time to fix all those items, that we flag that need to be corrected.
Jordan, we had a question here. I know that you've touched on this a little bit, but is this the kind of industry you could get into, like, let's say on a smaller scale? Like, I know you're doing huge projects, but like you said, like a personal residence.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm required to be licensed through the state for doing stuff in the public realm, but I know there's a ton of landscape designers out there who aren't licensed, that are just getting started, that do stuff in the private residential sector, as well as licensed professionals doing stuff in the private sector, which is a great way to start. I mean, I know I did a lot of designs for family and friends and neighbors and things of that sort when I was just getting started out, which is a great path to take. And smaller scale projects probably a little better to start with, and really rewarding as well. The time frame isn't 5 years for those to get built. For stuff you design for private residential to be built, within a couple of months. So sometimes a little more gratifying to see it happen right away as well.
Well, it looks like we're going to have to cut it there. We're going to give our students some time to get over to the other sessions. Jordan, we really absolutely appreciate your time today, and really wanted to express our appreciation for everything that you've done. This presentation, I believe we've got a lot off of it. I'm going to let Al go ahead and conclude everything here, and I'm going to be moving on to my next section. So thanks.
Yeah, well, really appreciate it, guys. Thank you for your time.
Okay, well, again, the mystery of the landscape architect is always one that's out there. It's like the Sasquatch.
Yeah,
and what we find is when you go to the colleges nowadays, I don't know when's the last time you've had to walk the long halls of any of the CSUs or the UCs. The landscape architect is looked at as the one that really makes it all come together.
Right.
And that is recognized in that way by many of the other engineering, construction, management, and architect students, that when you talk to them about, who kind of has the best sense of this project, they refer to the landscape architect as being the one that has the most breadth and the most scope. So
well, that's great to hear,
Yeah, I want to make sure that we make sure our kids are aware of it, since we don't have the degree here at our local university. So thank you for coming and sharing today. And we're going to definitely put this in our library, and Brian will make sure that you get a copy of this presentation.
Yeah, okay, great.